This episode of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast has been brought to you by our sponsors at Sweet Cheetah Publicity. Sweet Cheetah is a PR collective that values people over profit. They put a different spin on public relations by working primarily with friends and using all profits to aid charitable organizations. With a roster that includes Jawbox, The New Amsterdams, Brainiac, Get Some, Funeral Date, Damian Dunn, and many more artists, record labels, and podcasts. Sweet Cheetah! That's a great PR cohort. You can find them on social media by simply searching Sweet Cheetah PR, and they'll be there. He's been Tim, I've been Peter, and Sweet Cheetah has been beautiful.
If I'm the curse to win this, I would. If I could to win this, I would.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I am your host, Peter, and I am still here. Tonight, I bring to you Zai Valdez and Daniel Potvin of the group Violet Silhouette. In December of 2020, during the COVID apocalypse, they gave us their version of Psychic TV's Godstar. In April of the following year, they gave us the EP Semi-Permanent Derealization. 3 months later, the single There's No Way Out came into the world, which incidentally is playing right behind my voice as we speak. This past June, their most recent single, Strange Wind, was released, enmeshed in a confluence of styles and influences. The two came together and built the machine that is Violet Silhouette. As I said to the two gentlemen in question, whenever a publicist reaches out to me and pitches a band, I'm always a bit dubious, for good reason. I was blown away by this. It legitimately reminded me of some of my favorite eras of music, be it The Cure and Depeche Mode, The Mission and Alien Sex Fiend, to 90s fare, like Switchblade Symphony, Miranda Sex Garden, and so many other incredible artists that didn't quite make it to the surface of the mainstream, as it were. As usual, I had a legitimately fantastic time talking to these two, and I cannot wait to hear what's coming next. They are currently embroiled in recordings and mastering in order to bring to us their newest record. We'll get to them again in a second, but if you dig what you hear on this podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, share my stuff. You know the drill. It means the world to us, and the only way for more people to hear this podcast is through you, the listener. And we appreciate everything you do for us, truly. I had the pleasure of sitting with these two for over an hour to speak about matters of all sort. I'm so convinced that you're all going to love this band that I personally guarantee it. How am I going to back that up? Hey, just give it a listen, right? If you don't dig it, yell at me. But I think you will. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Zai and Daniel. Violet Silhouette on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. a publicist hits me up about a band, I'm normally, a little standoffish. In this case, on the other hand, I started listening to your latest song, Strange Wind. I was transported to my childhood, which was the 1980s, late 1980s. I'm 47. In those days, I was listening to, The Mission, Sisters of Mercy, The Cure, things like that. You guys bring a lot of that into it, but there's also, it's very danceable. So if you don't mind, could you kind of tell me how you came to this? Like what the child versions of you were listening to when you wanted to start creating music, and what brought you to this?
Yeah, Dan.
Oh, you want to go first?
No, go ahead. You go first.
Oh, okay. I guess, probably around that time too. Depeche Mode was always a big influence for me, especially when I was a kid. And it's one of those bands that I didn't realize that I had heard it until later on in life, until I was in college or something. And then I started, kind of going back into their back catalog. I had a friend who said that Ultra was the best album to have sex to, and I believed him. And but from there, I was listening to going back to Violator and Music for the Masses and things like that, and I had been exposed to it in a really roundabout sort of way, and it definitely had an impact on me.
For me, I think where I got introduced to a lot of these, I guess you could call them alternative electronic textures and sounds and things like that, was do you guys remember there's 2 games for PlayStation 2, I believe. It was like DDR for your fingers. It was Amplitude and Frequency.
I remember Frequency very well.
Yeah, and I remember being really young and having that game, and there's a sort of a free mode where you can kind of use banks and certain loops at bands like the Chemical Brothers and Fear Factory and all. It had such a sample of just about everything, whether it was synth pop to techno and acid to industrial. And then that was just a cool little way of me getting introduced to that music, but also just being introduced to sounds that I probably, being as kind of young as I am, I'm 32, so this is probably late 90s or early 2000s that I discovered all this stuff. But yeah, I wasn't really getting, MTV would kind of diminish as I grew older, so I wasn't around for the good meat. Yeah, right.
See, that's the thing though, in my opinion, for the most part, I think people in your age group, they embrace music in a way that I think my generation kind of missed the boat, because everything had to be codified with us, especially the scene I'd come from. I came from hardcore specifically. Mm-hmm. I was always into Depeche Mode and The Cure. My daughter's named after a Cure song, but there was always that codified, gatekeepy kind of nature to you. If you're into this, you're going to wear this uniform. You have to be this. I think people in their 30s and younger, that's not really a thing anymore. I don't know if that was your experience.
I think every scene's kind of gate kept, because it is, it's something special to everybody, and it creates that community. And I think as human beings, we're naturally, I think people are trying to be more inclusive now. But I remember when I was in high school and stuff, it was, you were either into punk or you were into hardcore, and they were very exclusive.
Yeah.
And then where I had lived, which was in the middle of nowhere, New Jersey, you'd go to a show and it'd be 2 street punk bands, a hardcore band, and a ska band. Mm-hmm. And you'd have no choice but to kind of everybody get together and have a good time, because it was really the only action in a 30-minute radius.
Same in Pennsylvania, to be honest.
Yeah.
We had the same vibe, but next state over. So, years go by, you start to hatch this band, right? Pre-COVID, right? Right before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come to pass?
So I was, Zai had a band called Skoros at the time. And this is how we kind of started playing together. We had made friends by DJing at the same club down here in West Palm Beach. It's called Respectable Street. I had been DJing there for a couple years. Zai had been DJing there for a little while, and I would go in and I'd hear his sets, but I had never met him. And I'd hear his sets. I'm like, oh, who's this guy? He's really good. And we kind of had that back and forth. And then one night we just bonded over dinner and just like, talking bands, and we were just right in the same vein. You had Skoros going on at the time, which had a great live show. If you asked anybody who saw Skoros.
It was kind of like my spin off of, like synth punk, and being very inspired by, say, like early Skinny Puppy Twitch era ministry and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just there wasn't a lot of orchestration. It was just like getting rage piss drunk with synthesizers and just like going at it. It had this like pretty Hate Machine, that early Trent sort of angst and pissed off attitude, and then me and Dan started like kind of hashing out some ideas about stuff, and this seemed to have more intention, I think, seemed to have more orchestration to it. And I don't know, maybe it was just me getting older, but it's also me like evolving as a musician, and just being like, I want to compose things in a different way. And so this is how it's looking.
Yeah. And when Zai came up with some of the skeleton tracks that he had composed, me and Justin, our bass player, at the time we were playing in a band called Deathbirds together, which was more rock and roll. And we just kind of heard these different things, and then all of a sudden, like, the sounds really just found itself, and we're all just kind of looking at each other like, this is okay, I think we have something. And it felt really, really good, and it felt really really passionate.
And that's what kind of grabbed me immediately, because there's a lot of quote unquote post punk that's really popping in this era. Mm-hmm. And I'm with it. I'm here for it. I'm good with it. But they all seem to mesh together at some point or another. You have your outliers, but then there's that sound that everyone kind of gloms onto and tries to ride that wave. There's none of that here. To me, this is very individualistic. It would have had more in common, in my opinion, with things that I had been listening to 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think another reason for that is the lyrics. I think lyrically, you're not talking about, bats, graveyards, and the like. It's very personal, and it's mining a very deep well of sadness, in my opinion. I don't know how on the money I am with it, but that's from my experience with it. That's what I've been gleaning from it. If someone could kind of speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of these skeleton tracks were made, or I would say the top line melodies and things like that, where I wrote them initially on just acoustic pianos, very just alone, dimly lit space, and just having a very raw experience with that. And then I would take it, once I had that raw emotional connection to it, without the flash and without the delays and all this stuff that you can do with synthesizers now, I just wanted that initial raw spark to happen. And then I pour a cup of coffee, burn the midnight oil, and just sit in a very cold room under headphones and just start to create textures off of that melody. And then those textures sort of, obviously, in my mind, they create the space that I think I want the listener to share it, to be shared with when they're listening to it. And yeah, it is kind of like cold and icy and a lot of welling, and yeah, like this sensation of being, as we call it, in some kind of grotto,
Yeah, and it's set. That's, I think, what makes it feel so singular and isolated is that fact. That's the way where you're coming from it. What is the live experience like right now? Are you playing shows currently?
Yeah. We've taken a little break lately just to kind of get this album EP finished up and get everything out. But we've been playing pretty consistently, like, since mid 2020, because we're in Florida. So, things opened up pretty quickly down here. So yeah, I think our shows have a certain amount of, there's definitely a certain amount of chaos that happens like on stage. Like we definitely can tell that we both came from like punk rock backgrounds, and metal backgrounds. But it's just, the feelings that well up when we're performing these songs, sometimes you're drawing from a different place than you are when you're initially writing it and recording it. Some nights different lyrics mean different things, and the swell of a synth just carries you in a different way. And then the next thing you know, a microphone stand goes flying. I have to move a guitar off the ground. Sometimes people are on stage with us, sometimes they're not. It's just pretty chaotic, but it's fun. And I'm just like, did nobody knock my keyboard over?
Well, that's a plus. Trent Reznor, on the other hand, would have smashed his own. From my experience of having seen them.
Another one. We can't afford extra. When we start smashing our synths on stage, you'll know that things are going very well for us.
Right. When we play live, it's evident that we came from punk backgrounds, and it's kind of hard to snuff that sort of fire when you really do feel it. And so there is this emotionality and flailing about when we're playing, but there is also this kind of like, oh, these guys are stripping down. Like, these guys are they're ripping through layers and going into these vulnerabilities. So it's not.
Go through it.
What's that?
We go through it.
Yeah. It's not just like, oh yeah, we're flailing about because it's entertaining and everybody's like, ooh, look at these fucking zoo animals that look like they haven't been out in like forever. But to us, it is more like we're shedding through, we're breaking through, we're kind of like casting off different shells as we go about.
So it's like a constant state of almost like catharsis upon catharsis every time you play. That going through that on a night that has to wear on you after however many nights in a row. Where does the drive keep coming from? Like when that exhaustion takes over and it's time to start over again at the next show.
I just love it.
That's
really where it comes from. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather do than play a show.
I've been playing around with this concept of a colorful and synthesized primitivism, and it's kind of like when we're up there and the lights are doing their little dance and the synths are doing their dance and everything starts to sort of collage together in the way that it does. Something else occurs like that. It's very akin to when you go to like an ethnic cultural festival of where people are, honoring themselves or offering themselves to deities and spirits, if you will. And there's this thing that happens where you can really place a substantial degree of pressure on the body and on the psyche, but it's kind of it's an intentional pressure, much in the same way that when you exercise, you are intentionally putting stress onto your being, and in that there's a certain degree of a spectrum that you're playing with, where it's like, how far can I go to where this becomes injury? So it's, as performers, we're always playing with that. Oh, I think I can go for this bigger. I want to go for that bigger wave. I want to push it to the more right. And this is where sometimes we get in trouble, as individuals, or behaviorally speaking. We get in trouble because we're always trying to chase the next big wave, and sometimes it's bigger than we thought, and it pulls us under, and it keeps us under for a little too long than we'd like. And
you just gotta go, but you just gotta go with it. You gotta let yourself go into it and let it take you.
Yeah, it's a shamanic experience. I mean, I can speak to it just having played in heavy bands, mostly hardcore bands, but getting more out there as I'd gone on, being a devotee of the band Neurosis. That was always a shamanic experience.
Neurosis is great.
They're my favorite band, although their one singer / guitarist is in a ton of trouble. Regardless of that, giving yourself over to the inherent spirit of your own music is as spiritual as I think any human being could possibly feel. You're connected to something other. Could you hang a name on that ethereal experience? Is it
the silhouette? That's what we call it.
is that so? That's the impetus for the name.
Actually, the impetus for the name is slightly different. We wanted to call it Violent Silhouettes, but I was when I talked to the promoter of our first show, he had heard it as Violet Silhouette, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's the name of the band." And it was much better. That's what Violet Silhouette.
And then it sort of became this thing where around the time that we would either get together to write songs or get tap into that state that we get into to feel inspired and so forth, or before a show, certain interesting things would happen. These little, you call them synchronicities and other people call them other things, but just certain strange occurrences would happen surrounding an event or a night or pre-performance or something. And then we just started to sort of notice that reoccurrence, that pattern. So then we started to name this sort of where it all, the congruence of all that stuff became the silhouette, this other thing, the other in capital letters that we're trying to sort of touch, which who knows, it's probably us and not, it's like God experiencing itself sort of thing.
Well, I mean, that is the essence of, the paranormal, the parapsychological, the religious aspect of the human experience, the spiritual. We're finding what we're looking for, no matter what it is. But I think what you're talking about, what musicians are feeling, is something that is very intangible. But when you connect with it, you serve it as much as it serves you. It's probably the most honest, transactional, spiritual experience one can probably be involved with. You go to church, you have to pay, right? You have to put in the collection plate. Being a cultural Catholic, I had grown up altar boy, but you put the money in the plate, and then God's good with you again until next week. This isn't that. It's a trade. And it's very even. Did you experience this in your former bands?
I think for me, no. I think it was much more feral. I think I was honoring something a little bit more visceral for myself in those previous projects. And then, you take that dog out on the walk as many times as it needs to, and then, it becomes a little more trained. Is a little bit more, okay, I can flail about and move about, but still kind of stay with that emotional current that's with me too. I used to sometimes just like lose my, like, almost kind of like black out, like lose my sight. It just kind of like felt like a dream, like where it's like I just blinked and the show's over and it's like, what the hell happened? And I wasn't lucid in that experience. So I think Violet Silhouette was an opportunity to try to approach that lucidity with being in that, say, rapture of performing.
Mm-hmm. I never get to talk to people about this kind of stuff. It's very, very refreshing. Keeping on that subject, were either of you believers in anything other prior to having experienced this in the context of playing music?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of different levels, and I think, I don't know what's the best way to say this. I definitely believe that things are work together in like a grand cosmic scale with enough chaos, there's order in enough chaos kind of thing, because there's so many things that we can't predict. But at the same time, I think when you live kind of like intentionally and you have those focuses and you really, you don't just demand things from the universe, but like it's kind of like that ebb and flow of, you have to kind of, you're going down a path. It might not be what you expected, or things may not be the way they turned out, but if you keep going, you grow as a person, you kind of come to something else. And I think some people can call that God. I think other people can call it the universe. You can call it transdimensional interception if you want to. It depends on which psychedelics you're taking and what you've seen on that particular journey. But I think a lot of that by diving so deep within ourselves that we understand a larger consciousness.
My upbringing was a rather, I guess, kind of plays into this a little bit too, in the way that I approach all of these things. Having a Cuban, having my heritage be Cuban, there was on that island there was a big sort of fusion of spiritual systems. You had obviously the European sect of religions and traditions and so forth, and then you had the mysticism of African shamanism as a factor there too. So it all, whether you were a practitioner or not, that sort of that sense of how would I say it, the animism that is taught in these sort of shamanic practices or beliefs or approaches is that everything is alive. The trees are alive. So it wasn't just like this focus on this like monotheistic sort of framework of give yourself over to this thing, but it was, but wait a second, there are also many things in working all around this sort of central theme. So my family was really good not to be dogmatic and imposing as to how I believed with it. The main message was everything's alive, open up, communicate, and things will, what you can believe this, you can believe that, you can take someone's word of this or the other, but there's an interesting thing that happens when you allow the receptivity of what is. And that was, I think, a very special way of how I would approach art. Art isn't just this thing I'm imposing my predictions on or my beliefs on, how I want it to serve me, but it's this process in which I can say the artistic process is synonymous with opening up.
Yeah, you're a part of it, and that's the. I think that's the part that a lot of people, a lot of musicians, kind of miss. Right, like you're not whipping this thing into shape. You're not molding it from sheer nothingness. All of those notes existed. The way you put them together is dictated not only by your own skill, but how far into it you want to tap.
Yeah.
You let it affect you as much as you affect it. But that sense of spirituality you're talking about, that transcends. American Indians believed everything had a Manitou and everything had a spirit. I think that is prevalent in a lot of shamanic belief systems. And I find it fascinating that the dogmatic European Roman Catholic bent really sought to destroy that. Yeah, and I think it's because it was more pure and honest in a lot of respects.
I do too, and I think it's about it's 100% about control. And but you even see that in how Christianity had adopted, Euro-Christianity adopted, pagan cultures and pagan traditions, basically so they could just get the locals on board and say, oh yeah, we do that too.
Yeah.
Everything at some point.
Celebrating Saturday. Hey, it's Jesus' birthday. Look at that.
Right. Yes. If anything becomes sort of popular at the local level, at the people's level, it's always going to try and get sabotage. It's always going to try and get sort of coverted into some sort of political agenda and aim. Every system, even the Judeo-Abrahamic traditions, have had mystic traditions associated with them. The Christians had the Gnostics, and in Judaism you had the Kabbalists and so forth. So all these things, it's like what Aldous Huxley calls like the perennial philosophy. That everything is just sort of pollinating each other culturally, and it's all just one big message. It's all connected in some cloud that they've called the collective unconscious or whatever, but these are interesting things to play with. These archetypal experiences, identities, and so forth are very fun and applicable to use when you're in the artistic process, whether that be to heal yourself or to, as a magical way of kind of like shooting out your aspirations to your reality or your whatever you want to happen. So yeah, all this stuff is sort of like art intersects with spirituality. Obviously, they're one pulsating entity, and how I guess it gets funneled through me and Dan and anyone associated with this is via through the silhouette.
Yeah, and that's your conduit. And it's incredible to me that you just brought up Huxley, because Brave New World changed my life, and then like that's kind of what it is, like what we're living in now, and we're sort of the noble savages, you know, into the forests, running away from, you know, their opiates and their fallacies. Yeah, that's how it truly feels, especially under our last president.
Yeah, I was telling Dan actually recently that a lot of these songs, I mean, once you start to hear the whole of the album Fever Blue, they're all kind of like, I joked that they were all Blade Runner diner songs. You know, they're just songs about romanticism and connection and trying to thirstingly search for true spiritual connection. Meanwhile, you're in the most dystopianly connected place ever, being surveillanced everywhere, you know, and there's always all these voices beaming at you, little computers trying to talk to you, and somewhere there's this, you know, droopy-eyed, sensitive poet that just wants to, like you said, run away into the woods with the love of his life or something.
But you know, that's what this is for too. That's what true creatives are for. Where like it's a signpost, like, listen, there's more here. Music sometimes can be used for horrible things. I mean, there's an entire culture of like bands like Screwdriver that completely subverted everything that was great about punk rock and turned it into something vile. But for the most part, musicians, artists they're a different breed completely. They are apolitical. They are in spirit. You could have a political agenda, but in truth, you're in that club. You're a part of that faith. It's a belief system, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's the true faith.
Yeah,
it is. Well, because that's where it comes from, and that's what makes a good song. You know, no matter what the genre is. Like, I know you have that. What's that? Sisters of Mercy behind you, and Typo Negative.
Yeah, that's Typo Negative. The Cure. It's Quicksand. Like, I got it all.
You have all the good stuff, but it's like what makes those albums and those songs really good is, you know, it comes from a place that's deliberate and it's performed with conviction. And to me, like, that's the biggest difference between, you know, a song that you can keep listening to and something that's like, oh yeah, it's okay, and you just kind of like let it slide and it doesn't really hit you. But when there's conviction in it, the performer who's singing that, or, you know, ripping that guitar solo, or just, you know, playing this like lush melody because they understand the way the piano sounds and the way the room is mic'd up and the way everything's just gonna carry through, like, that's what stays with you, and that's what really makes you a believer out of it.
And I think it's sad that a lot of the people whose records reside behind me were sort of lost to, you know, the substances that they use to try and get there sometimes, or to escape that place as well. Psychedelics are not one of those. Psychedelics, they open you. But when it comes down to the depressants and the opioids, that seems to be, and cocaine, that seems to be where we lose everyone. I almost went down that road myself. There's something very non-narcotic about what you guys are doing, though. Like, it doesn't feel doped to me. It feels very unfettered.
I appreciate that. I think that, I mean, every sort of substance, right, has this. I don't know who said it. I mean, but it's a very Terence McKenna-ish statement to say that each sort of drug has in it its own little universe, it's its own little realm, you know. Yeah. And there's something about the opiates and the depressants, and where the lethargy, I think that something happens to where like spiritual lethargy occurs and you just sort of drown or something like that, you know. Whereas certain other drugs kind of contain this sense of flight or this sense of poof, like coming out. But, you know, then you get stuck out there. It's like reverse drowning, you know? Yeah.
Right. Somebody bring me back.
Well, that's where psychedelics come into play, I think.
Yeah.
If you could stick to THC mushrooms and like, you know, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
You might get a little freaked out here and there, but you're not going to die.
I think as long as you know, well, especially because those don't have like, you know, it's not like opioids and coke, which like just fucking grab onto your brain receptors and say, oh no, it's gonna be a little while till you can get rid of me. Like, you know, the habits that you form when you're doing psychedelics or THC and stuff, they're more habitual and less addictive if you're doing it a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same thing too. If you don't give yourself like that room to breathe with it, you know, you realize you're high on the couch again, and all you can think about is the last like 6 years of your life for some reason, and you're just like couch locked. You're like, well, maybe I should have gotten high for like the 4th time this week. Maybe I should like dial it back a little bit.
But you know, that is kind of the choice we make when we find ourselves in these rooms with these things where people are involved. You know, are you weak to it? Are you attracted to it? Is there something about putting yourself in harm's way that gets you off? I think that was definitely me. But
yeah, 100%. It's half the fun.
It is half the fun for sure.
It's that Freudian death drive that they talk about, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's that thing that it's this compulsion that we have that to just sort of kill ourselves, that we mistake as maybe taking it too literal and not mythically, you know, not going through the sort of symbolic process of dying or whatever. It's an interesting thing, honestly. I've actually been experiencing like the 1 foot in 2 realms experience of like trying to maintain sort of your real world responsibilities and finances and so forth in check and in order, and then the other side have this rich inner life that's just sort of swimming with ideas. But to try and manage those 2 realms in some like cooperative fashion is like it's one hell of a practice. It's one hell of a, you know.
Yeah, and I think that is something you have to practice in order to perfect, in order to have that inner duality. And keep them both in check without one stymieing the other. And that plays into the one and only question I ever ask anyone. It's the only pre-prepared question I have for any band, being this: what is it that terrifies you most on an existential level?
This is a good one.
Ooh, terrifies me the most. Let's see.
Well, I think for me, it's kind of like, obviously, I'm not immune to the whole fear of, you know, dying, you know, or in other words, you know, cosmic insignificance. You know, everyone's sort of like terrified about that, or that, oh my God, are all these meanings that I'm finding for my existence, are they null? Are they, etc.? But another part of me is like, no, go even deeper. It gets much more terrible. Watch, just keep going. Interestingly terrible is the notion that dying is it's not dying that sucks. It's being left alone and while you're still alive, right? Without the people that make it make you want to stay or make it worthwhile. You know, it's people leaving you, not you dying. That is actually the real, you know, that's where real pain and suffering come from.
Yeah. And I think I'm kind of right there with you, because it's like that to me is what kind of freaks me out the most. And it's more about like those tangible relationships that we have here. Whatever happens after we die, I'm quite confident that, you know, this isn't the end. You know, your consciousness and your spirit goes elsewhere. I mean, the worst that could happen is, you know, I'm wrong and nothing happens. It doesn't matter anyway because I'm fucking dead.
Yeah.
So, but everything else in between that, it's understanding what's really important to you, as a spiritual being, as like organic beings too. Like, we need connection. We crave connection. And, when that gets pulled out from under you and, you have to try and like refigure out your whole life, it's a terrifying prospect because you don't know where to start. I think when you're at the point where like you're Googling, what do people do? And just like trying to figure out how the fuck do I get out of my apartment today? Like, how do I go? Do I just go to the restaurant and I sit down by myself and then they bring me food? Is that how this works? So I think you get kind of lost in that rabbit hole. But when you're spun so far out, like, you have no idea what's going on. So I think that's so far that's my biggest existential fear. That and my skin falling off from radiation sickness.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's that. That's that whole the Cold War kids kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
But I've gotten that answer, or a derivation of the answer you've both given so many times, and it brings me back to when I was a small child, explaining my idea of God to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was my youngest is 4 years old at my age. Crazy, right? I was probably like 5, maybe a year older than him. And I said, I think what happened was God took himself apart and we're all little pieces. And that's why we get lonely, because we're not supposed to be alone, because we're all the same
We're all
thing.
pieces of the same thing.
Yeah. I was 5.
Yeah.
There you go.
Fresh from the abyss, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't here that long. I'd already been over there a while.
Yeah. The conditioning and the programming, it didn't set in yet, know.
No, and thankfully it didn't ever really set in. I was only culturally Catholic, as I said.
Yeah.
You do what you have to do in a small Pennsylvania town in order to fly under the radar.
Yeah.
But the new EP is that it's completed, correct?
Yeah, it's all written. It's all done. We just are playing back and forth with our engineer right now.
Yeah.
But basically the master sort of, or the files to be mastered, they're right in the zip folder and waiting to, be dissected and put back together. But it's been one hell of a process, man. Like, it's involved a lot of just like dark rooms and, cold 3 a.m. nights of just being under headphones and with one light source, like just kind of out in this weird cosmic, electronic cosmic ocean, with your little light. And
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these songs have this kind of, a friend told me that they have this sort of sailor's journey. They said a sailor's journey sort of thing to them.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think also too is like, coming through these songs, we finished our last EP, Semi-Permanent Derealization, like during the pandemic. And like some of these songs we had started writing then too. So we've like carried these around for, some of them for over a year, playing live and things like that. Strange Wind is one of those songs where we played it live and we keep refining it. And I think that, both of us were in, I'd be up, Zai would be down, and it would be like back and forth, and we try and like a sailor's journey, just try and lock arms and pull each other up, when the other one was down to get through a lot of this and work together with it. So I think that's really interesting that sentiment seems to have come through the song.
The writing process for you too. I mean, is it done in a room together? It doesn't seem like you guys do quote unquote jamming in the room. It's more like singular experiences. You're trading them. Am I picking up on that correctly?
Yeah. So Zai is super fucking talented. So I'm just gonna throw that out there now. And he'll come with like a skeleton of a song. He'll have, like, I'm good with parts. I'm good with like fills. I'm good with writing some riffs. Zai will come in and put the skeleton of a song together super fast, and then we'll kind of go back and forth on it. And some of them just sound so damn good. Like we don't need to do anything. I'm like, this doesn't need an extra synth. This doesn't need a bass line. It has all the components here, so we'll tweak it a little bit. And then I think lyrically, we'll both like come in with our own ideas. Some songs Zai writes. I have a few that I've written, but I think a lot of times we just we work the melody and we work the lyrics, so we understand like where the other person is kind of coming from, and then we'll I'll write a few lines, I'll change some of his lyrics, he'll change some of my lyrics, and then we have this, all of a sudden we have a song that's better than something either of us could have written, I think.
Yeah, we sort of play a cool like cut up with our words and our stanzas or lines or whatever. Basically, we just start to write poems sometimes as we're listening to some of the songs. And then we just kind of take them and go, here, or no, let's put it here or here, and then take this part, and then that's how we play around with that. And then it starts to create different ideas and visions, if you will, of things that we didn't even see respectively. So it's always a cool little thing that kind of, he opens his window, I open my window, and then something interesting happens. The silhouette intervenes, I guess.
Silhouette forms, yeah.
It's like you're playing Exquisite Corpse. Everybody's doing their own little piece and putting them together.
Yeah, and sometimes, you find that, because I'll write lines, I'll write like 2 or 4 lines like at a time, just, stop what I'm doing, write it down, and keep going about my day. And then we'll be writing a song and I'm like, oh, I have something for that. And I'll go back like 6 months and I have like 2 or 4 lines that fit perfectly into a sentiment that like Zai's bringing forward with what he's been writing. And then it's, I don't know, it's fun. I like it.
It's definitely not organized, but it's
not organized.
A lot of things that are fun aren't very organized. That's just where the charm of it is, I guess.
We try. I think it's like we're charming in that way, that we try and be organized. But it's just
what's the release look like though? Like, is this going to be a digital release? Or are you going to do the crazy thing and physically release something?
We would like to physically release it. It's definitely going to be digital first.
Yeah.
And then hopefully we can make enough money to press physical copies.
The photography that we're using for it is actually my brother's photography. He is a big film analog nerd, and not a nerd, obviously. He's an artist in that way of capturing texture and grain and that nostalgia, I guess, that we've been getting. That film is getting really popular again for kind of opening up, but
there's a warmth to it.
Oh yeah.
It's just, Chris's photography is, he did our press photos, and, kind of informed, almost like part of our visual identity is his photographs.
Yeah, that photo in your most recent press kit where you're sitting around the table, you look like almost I don't want to call it vampiric, but certainly some sort of undead libidinous feast is about to transpire. You're all sitting around the table looking slightly detached but ravenous at the same time.
Yeah.
And that black and white is so... I could tell it was analog because it had so much depth and so much bite to it. It looked like, an old film, like a 1920s silent film in its way. Very, very deep, very tactile experience. Musically, although you're creating with, synths that may not be analog, I could tell you're kind of trying to mine that vibe as well, something a little more organic, even though you're using something very cold and almost detached in the synthesizer.
Yeah, I think we go for a lot of those warmer textures with, we do some analog synths. It's mostly the MS-2000, because one of the actual only analog one we have. Well, we have a mini log now too, but kind of finding because you have all those preset sounds. We use Logic a lot, and you have the preset sounds, and they're fine, but like it needs a lot of tweaking, needs a lot of compression. Zai's fucking fantastic with EQing things and just giving things like these depth and warmth by like combining reverbs, compression. I'll let you talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that what I'm also trying to achieve when I'm not so about dying on the hill that like analog is better, that no, it has voltage, therefore it has this warmth that you can't get on digital, et cetera, et cetera. We've all heard like that argument before. But I think one of the reasons why it might be some of these songs might have that sort of standalone feature or quality to them that kind of sets it apart from some of the other post-punk stuff that you mentioned earlier, is that I'm okay with some of this stuff sounding cold and bitey, and it's just I think it's an expression of part of the digitized noise that we experience every single day when we go out into the world. I mean, you go to pump gas and there's a computer, a synthesizer essentially talking to you, and all these beeps to take out your card, and and I'm trying to get that too. All this stuff just builds and builds and builds, and sometimes when you're kind of going into these like over sensory experiences, right? Like when you hit the pen too hard in the grocery store and everything starts to fucking like, oh my God, images eventually start to coalesce together and they start to attack you. Yeah. Why is that so fucking red? Why does that sign need to be so red? And all these sounds are so chip-tuned and bitey, and I'm trying to, maybe this is a way of trying to make it musical, and change my association to it a little bit, make it melodic. Well, the way that I used to remember math or mathematic, sort of how I would keep numbers in my head when I was a child, was I would sing them. Yeah. If I could sing them, if I could make a song or a jingle out of something, I could remember it, and it has a place in my psyche that's not like just this piece of gunk that's doesn't even, I says it's two because it's two, but that's it. So yeah, it's just trying to make sense of everything, of the world, and part of that world is that digital technological side to it.
Yeah, but that's not the only element there. And right. I think that's kind of the point. Like there's so many layers to what you're doing, but it doesn't sound muddled. You know what I mean? There's something still cutting through that's very human. And as much as like I grew up on Skinny Puppy, I love Skinny Puppy. I just went to see Skinny Puppy again.
Oh yeah.
Everything they did, prequel to Too Dark Park, was very, very ice cold.
Yeah.
And menacing. And then they started to change. They started to have a more nuanced sound. You came out of the gate with a very nuanced sound.
Mm-hmm.
How does this new EP stand up as far as the rest of your EP and your other singles are concerned? Does it vary in sound from those, or?
I think so. I think it feels like, I don't want to say a different direction, because it's very much a similar direction that we've taken the whole time, but it's not narrow at all. We have some songs that are a little simpler and a little brighter, and others that we're being, more experimental vocally with and sound wise. I think we have a couple surprises with this new EP that sound different, but still very much like us.
I think one of the things that I was trying to kind of showcase a little more in this EP. Well, it's close to becoming like almost a full album now, because as at first it was like, hey, let's just like come out with like 3 or 4 songs and make them all good, and
more songs like another song every month.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, but wait, we need this intro, and then that's it. You're neck deep, and you're like, I gotta go full swing now. But is this there's definitely noisy textures and stuff, as I mentioned in there, but there's this element in some of these songs where it just feels like a flood, Some of them have that well of sadness, and some of it is is you're in the whirlpool and it's bringing you down, and some of it is I'm riding the wave.
There's like an exuberance.
Exactly. But it's that same thing. I think what we're trying to, that same force that's drowning and it keeps us sort of stuck is also that same force that liberates if you approach it in that certain way. But I don't think I said anything about it, about the sound physically.
We come from a very emotional place with everything.
Well, that's music. I don't really concern myself with, oh, why does it sound, what the sound, the you know, what key, like I don't really, like, I'm a musician, so I understand it, but to me that doesn't move me. Intention does, emotion does, and composition does, especially when you take those two things and, you know, compose them, make them into something tangible and direct and honest. That's why when Pretty Hate Machine came out, I fell in love with it. When Too Dark Park came out with it, when Violator came out, Disintegration, like these albums are hallmarks for a reason, because they were very honest and very deep, and they didn't just sound like one thing. There wasn't just one like drone the whole way through where this song like this song's going to sound like this song. No. These were like really well thought out, well heeled pieces of art.
It's interesting because some of those, especially with like Disintegration, which, you know, is one of my like pivotal albums that when I got my hands on it, definitely forever changed me, was that they could honor like a 2.5 minute intro. You know, it's just like, but it's not very pop of their or mainstream of them to be like, hey, you know, like you're gonna lose their attention. It's just, we're always plagued when we're like kind of putting music out to markets, you know, that we're gonna lose their interest if we just don't hit it from the bat right now, right here, and so forth. And I don't think that I'd want to view my like intended audience as people who are just like completely incapable of just being like, damn, I'm gonna sit with this intro for like a minute, 2 minutes, and oh, whoa, and then they just came at me with this swooping vocal, and oh, it's definitely picked up. And to go on for that ride, I think that's what a lot of music is missing now, is this sense to journey, the sense to go in, the sense to be pulled into and submersed into sort of like that realm. That's what Disintegration did for me, you know.
Well, that's the loss of the album format is what we're really talking about here, because with streaming digital music, it became such a singles market that, you know, I don't think young people, maybe they do, I hope they do, I want them to sit down and listen to a record from stem to stern. They'll preview it. They'll, oh, this song's cool, that song's cool. Yeah, I like that band, I like those two songs. But there's no sense of propriety,
right?
Because they didn't sit and live with the record. I used to have to, you know, go and pay for something. Like, God forbid, I'd have to go and buy a fucking record when I was 12 years old, 10 years old, when I started really collecting records around 10. And you paid for it. So even if you didn't like a song at first, you powered through it. And then you learned to like it almost, or you discovered something about it that didn't catch your ear at first, and then it became your favorite song on the record.
Right.
Fascination Street is a perfect example of that. I liked it when I first heard it, but it wasn't the grabber because it wasn't the single. But then slowly but surely, that is the most menacing song on that record. And boom, it's still my favorite song on that album. I don't know if young people are really taking the chance to have that experience with a fully realized piece of work from front to back. Just
I think you have a lot of people who like kind of now, because everything's been so fast and digital for so long, that people are actually looking for something that has more depth to it, and, you know, is a little bit more artistic and not necessarily manufactured to say, okay, this song's going to be 3 minutes and 30 seconds, intro, chorus, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, you know, like super structured out. And that you know, it takes you on a journey, and like if you're a good artist and you care about what you're doing, you know, you're making really good songs and really diverse songs, and I'm like, I want to hear the next one. I want to hear the next one. I know for me, like the new Carolyn Polachek album is like one of the best things I've heard like all year. And it's just like her album like takes you on a whole journey, and it's like not all the songs sound the same. She's experimenting with like different formats for the music and different vocal things and different like tones and stuff, and I just thought it was like a really fantastic album.
Yeah, I think she was like very inspired by Diamanda Galas and Jarbo with this record specifically.
Yeah.
If she wasn't, someone was telling her about them, because it had that same kind of sense of play, yet it's deadly serious. And
Yeah.
that's very cool.
Yeah.
If we were to ask you both, like you just said, the EP is slowly becoming more of a full length. What a full length would look like from you guys? Would it be something that's trying to present an entire cinematic experience like the aforementioned albums that I brought up earlier?
Honestly, the number that it's been doing on me emotionally, yeah, and it's developing. Like, it's not something that I'm like, oh yeah, no, you just wait till it, like, I'm just kind of in it right now. So I'm just, and this was such a great, like, this whole podcast has been great because it's given me the opportunity to sort of like reflect on that, you know, in between these little pockets of like, oh, I got to pay this, oh, I got to, all the aforementioned worldly responsibilities. But you get these moments where you get these opportunities, which I really appreciate, to go, oh yeah, this all is making a lot of sense. My behavior, my ups and my this and downs and my all the spinning around that I've been doing. Oh yeah, it's making some sense. And all I know is that this process, this album, this or whatever it's becoming, it's definitely doing a number on me. I'm really excited to release the cover because it really just exemplifies that stark, cold, icy kind of thing we go for, but also within it, that vibrance, that brightness that I think can come out of our, you know, dark plunges into the whatever dark, quote unquote, dark night of the soul. But yeah, it's been an interesting process. So I'm curious to see how the new life it takes once it gets released.
So how far out do you think we are?
Well, I think originally we were planning on August, but August is getting closer and closer. So I'm gonna say September.
September the fall feels good for this.
Yeah, it's definitely fall music.
Yeah, fall. You know, that it's that feeling of, oh, things are changing. These new winds are coming in, and strange winds are blowing through, and it's gonna get real cold.
The month of my birth, so that makes complete sense. I think it'd be a fantastic birthday present for me if you guys dropped it in September, just as a hint.
All right. Well, okay.
If you guys were to leave me with anything tonight, as I've probably tried to, you know, dive a little too deep into your emotional states and psyches, if you were to leave us with anything about your music that you would like to convey to my audience, that's like the key takeaway in your opinion, what would that be?
Dan, I'll let you go first with this one.
Thank you. I just have to go up with the answer quick.
We're not on the clock, guys. You can take your time with anything. I edit.
I don't know. I think it's something that I think Violet Silhouette, something that needs to be experienced. I think it's what we bring, you know, to our songs and to the way we craft our sounds, and the way we bring that to our live shows is something it feels unique compared to like all the bands that I've played in. It's definitely unique compared to a lot of bands that we play with. Again, just it's a catharsis of all sorts of energy. And I know writing these songs and performing these songs make me feel infinitely more in the moment, whether it's better or worse or positive or negative. It doesn't matter because it takes you on that journey.
Yeah, I think what I would like to leave with is one of the things that we mentioned earlier about vulnerability, you know, and ripping through the shells of the different layers of our personalities. And you know, it's all very difficult and sometimes seemingly ugly stuff. That process in and of itself is extremely ugly, and you'd be like, who the hell would want to be next to this, you know, as you're doing that. But to find, to try to transmute, in a sense, all of those disgusting, ugly, shameful, raw aspects of your emotional body, and to step forward courageously with honesty and with joyful resilience to go through it, whatever this it is, whatever it's called, whatever you're right, but hopefully in some evolutionary step for you integrally. And yeah, I'm not I think that these are just little bits of what's in that album, but it's just about approaching your sensitivities and your vulnerabilities with courage, and even doing a little dance while you're in it.
You guys really surprised the shit out of me. As I'd said at the top, I'd get publicists hitting me up about bands, and I turn them down quite a bit. Not because I'm, you know, a snob or whatever, but if something doesn't grab me, I'm not going to sit down and talk to a band. Because I'd be cheating that band. You know, I wouldn't be giving them the care and attention and you know, reverence that the material deserves. So I really admire what you do. That's why we're talking tonight, and I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. That's awesome. That's great. I mean, this was this conversation, I think, entirely was just like super. I wish we were just like really hanging out, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, shit, dude.
Well, listen, I get down to Florida often, so if I ever get down there within the next year or whatever, I'll definitely hit you guys up. And,
where in Pennsylvania are you?
The Scranton area.
Okay, I grew up in like Northwest Jersey, so like right on the other side of like the Delaware Water Gap.
Yep, so, exactly.
Yeah. So I think we're trying to like put together a couple Northeast dates right now. So I'll let you know if anything lands close to you.
Yeah, if you do, you could come and stay at the farm.
Beautiful.
All right, guys.
Great.
All right, brother.
Keep in touch with me, and I'll talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Have a great night.
Have a great night, fellas.
Bye.
And there you have it, folks. My conversation with Zion Daniel. It's not often, it almost never happens, that a band is introduced to me cold. I go into their work, and what I discover is something that I wholeheartedly enjoy, appreciate, and it captures my interest in a very real way. I fully enjoyed our conversation. They were intelligent, insightful, forthright, and it felt as though I had actually been in the exact same space as them while we were having this conversation. It did not feel like I was doing it over Google Meet or Zoom or any of the conferencing apps that we all tend to work through and have social relationships through since the pandemic first took place. I can't wait to hear this new single. I cannot wait to hear this new EP/album. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I hope you enjoyed the music you heard playing behind our voices. And I hope you come back. I hope you buy their music, listen to it, and I hope you come back to us as well. We've been working our way through the remaining recorded back catalog of interviews that we have left in the queue. So in the coming weeks, everything you hear will have been freshly recorded. So I'm going to be week to week for the first time since the first 3 months of the first season of this podcast, which feels like a load off of my shoulders. Can't wait. Can't wait for you to hear it all. It just gets better as it goes. I can't complain about one single aspect of this show. And it's mostly because of you all. So I thank you for that. They've been Zion Daniel of Violet Silhouette. I've been Peter of this podcast. You've been beautiful. And from 3:33 a.m. Studios, this has been The Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Go kiss your mom or something. Do whatever it is you do at the end of this podcast. But before you go, stick around for the most recent single from Violet Silhouette called Strange Wind. Good night, everybody. Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast has been a 3:33 a.m. Studios production. Executive produced by Tiana Lucy Tansky. Starring whoever I get on this show. And myself, Peter Tansky. Thank you all for listening, being a part of my world. Like, rate, subscribe, send me a DM, send me hate mail, whatever you want to do. But thank you so much, and have a great night.